I always believed that respect was the root of any healthy relationship. Love can be immense, but without respect it slowly rots, turns into routine, into duty, into uncomfortable silence. I learned that truth the hard way, one ordinary night in our apartment in Monteverdi, when Valeria, my wife, looked at me with her arms crossed and a mixture of contempt and mockery on her lips. We had argued, or rather I was trying to argue about how little was left of us as a couple. For months her tone had changed. Her presence had become colder than the bathroom tile. That night I just wanted to talk, to fix something. But what I got was a phrase that split our story in two. If it bothers you so much, find someone else. She said it as if it had no weight, as if our promises were wet paper. In that instant, I knew something inside me broke. It wasn't the first time we had argued, but it was the first time I noticed she didn't care about winning or losing. She just wanted to end it quickly and go back to her phone, her series, or her bed without me. Valeria used to be cheerful, passionate. She used to look for me in the small moments, but for some time my mere existence seemed to annoy her. I, naively, thought it was work stress, the long hours at the bank, the monotony. But that night I understood that what had died wasn't the routine, it was the interest. Valeria, I'm not asking you for anything impossible, I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. I just want you to show me that we're still a team. She let out a short, condescending laugh, again with the same thing. Tomas, seriously, your drama is boring. The word drama pierced me. That's what she called my need for affection. That's how she labeled my attempts to save what was still left. Her mockery was the final straw. Why are you like this? I asked. You weren't like this before, Valeria. She rolled her eyes. Before. People change. Tomas, everything becomes tedious. The routine kills. I stayed silent, watching her as she played with her ring. Are you bored of me? I asked in a low voice. She didn't answer, just sighed and murmured, This doesn't fulfill me anymore. And it was then, without looking up, that she dropped that phrase as if she were talking about the weather. If it bothers you so much, find someone else. There was a second of absolute silence, an invisible echo in the air. I looked at her, searching her face for some spark of regret, some shadow of emotion, but there was nothing, just indifference. And that indifference weighed more than any scream. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I laughed, a dry laugh, almost incredulous. Good idea. I finally replied with calm that even I didn't understand. But first stop counting on me for everything. She looked at me without fully understanding what she had just unleashed. That night there were no slammed doors, no insults, no tears, just a silent decision. Something inside me turned off completely. If for Valeria I was dispensable, then she would be too. For the first time in years, I allowed myself not to be her shadow, not to be available, not to run to rescue her every time something went wrong. And although she didn't know it yet, her phrase had not only ended the discussion, it had signed the beginning of her own regret. From that night on, my way of being at home changed without the need for words. There were no announcements, no threats, no dramatic speeches. I simply began to behave as if Valeria were a roommate and not my wife. For years I have been the one who kept everything in order, who remembered to pay the bills, buy the food, make the coffee before she woke up, make sure her life flowed without stumbling. If she had a bad day, there I was, ready to listen to her, to cheer her up, to lighten her load. But after that phrase, I decided that I would no longer do more than what she did for me, which was, in short, almost nothing. The first week was strangely calm. She thought I was just giving myself some time. The second week, she began to notice the small changes. The empty refrigerator, the unfolded clothes, the lights turned off at the wrong time, the silence. The turning point came when she forgot to pay the electricity bill. I always did it without her asking. That afternoon, while we were both at home, the lights suddenly went out. She jumped up from the couch and said with annoyance, "They cut the power again. Tomas, why didn't you warn me?" I just shrugged and answered without looking at her. "I don't know. I thought you had paid." Her brow furrowed, and for the first time in months, I saw something that looked like genuine surprise. "But you always take care of that," she murmured. "Not anymore," I answered in a neutral voice. She tried to keep her composure, but she didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. That night she ate in the dark, nervously checking her phone while trying to contact the electric company. I, on the other hand, enjoyed a tranquility that I hadn't felt in years, or in the passing of the days her discomfort grew. She noticed my distance, my emotional absence, but she didn't know how to face it. She would come home from work. She was a freelance graphic designer and spent hours locked in front of a computer and expected to find me with dinner served or with some kind gesture. Instead, she found me reading or leaving the apartment without notice. When she asked where I was going, I simply said to clear my head without further explanation. I no longer gave her control of my hours or my moods, and that paradoxically began to bother her more than any argument. She gradually realized that I was fulfilling her wish. I was looking for someone else, but not in another person, but in another version of myself. A Tomas who did not depend on her approval. One rainy night, almost 2 months after that phrase, she called me desperately. She was returning from a meeting with a client, and her car had stopped in the middle of the avenue. "Tomas, the car won't start. Can you come get me, please?" Her voice trembled between the rain and the horns. Out of habit, my first impulse was to grab the keys and run out, but I held back. I took a deep breath and remembered her words. "Can't you call a tow truck or someone else?" I replied calmly. There was a long, incredulous silence on the other end. "What did you say?" she asked in a high-pitched tone. "I say that if it bothers you so much, find someone else," I repeated, returning her own sentence to her. She was silent for a few seconds and then hung up without saying goodbye. That night she arrived soaked, with her hair stuck to her face, and without looking at me she went straight to the shower. She said nothing, but her silence was a mixture of anger and bewilderment. From then on, something broke definitively. It was no longer me who begged for attention, but her who began to seek it. Her morning messages became more frequent. She tried to start conversations, suggest dinners, plan outings, but I responded with the same indifference that she had shown me for so long. "Do you want to watch a movie together?" she would ask in a soft voice. "I'm busy," I answered without looking up from the book. "Let's eat out tomorrow," she insisted. "I'm not hungry." Each of her attempts crashed against an invisible wall, the same one she had built with her own hands. In her gaze, a new discomfort began to appear. The fear of someone who realizes that perhaps they lost something they took for granted. The change in Valeria was slow, almost imperceptible. At first, it started with subtle gestures. Making breakfast before I woke up. Leaving a note on the table with awkward phrases like, "Have a good day," or "Don't forget your coat. It's cold outside." They were minimal details, but I saw them more as attempts at redemption than as genuine signs of affection. She had finally understood that something had broken, although she still didn't realize how much. The irony was that the more she tried to win me back, the less it affected me. I was no longer hurt, just empty. After so long carrying the emotional weight of our relationship, I was finally resting. I had stopped feeling guilty for not living up to her expectations, because I had realized that there never was a fair height. She always moved the bar at her convenience, and now that I no longer danced to her rhythm, the music was unbearable to her. I began to notice a new anxiety in her. She constantly checked her phone, as if waiting for a message from me that never came. She would come home from work and look for conversation. She tried to tell me things about her day that she didn't share before. I listened to her in silence, politely, but without interest. I had been the one who begged for years for a little attention, for sincere talk, and she always dismissed me with tired phrases or empty looks. Now the tables had turned, and her desperation was evident. One night she even prepared my favorite food, pasta with basil sauce and chicken and white wine, and waited for me at the table with a smile that tried to be natural. "I thought we could have dinner together like before," she said. I just nodded, served myself a little, and ate in silence. She talked and talked, trying to fill the air, while I chewed slowly, detached. When I finished, I got up, washed my plate, and calmly said, "Thank you for dinner." Then I locked myself in my study. I heard her exhale long, holding back a cry that she didn't dare let out. The final blow came weeks later, in one of those conversations that start when we need to talk. She told me one Thursday night, when I had almost gotten used to her resigned silence. She was sitting on the couch with her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Tomas, I don't want us to continue like this," she murmured in a trembling voice. I watched her without saying anything. I didn't want things to come to this point. I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. For a moment, I thought she would ask for forgiveness, but she got stuck, as if it was hard for her to articulate the words. "I didn't know that our relationship mattered so much to you." Then I let out a short, bitter laugh. "I knew it for years, Valeria. The problem is that you didn't." She looked up and her eyes shone wet, as if she had just understood the damage she had caused. But there was no longer room for dramatics. Regret comes too late when respect is gone. That night we slept in the same bed, but separated by kilometers of emotional distance. I felt her choppy breathing next to me, the slight movement of her body when she turned looking for closeness, but I didn't respond. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about how we had come to that point, and I understood that the wear and tear had not been sudden. It was a slow drip of indifference, of words said without thinking, of gestures not returned. I had been her support, her base, her help, but also her habit. When something or someone becomes a habit, you stop looking. And when you stop looking, you lose. She had trusted that I would always be there, without realizing that even stones erode over time. At dawn, I made a decision. I got up without making noise. I made a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I looked up the address of a law firm in the city and scheduled an appointment for the following week. It was not an impulsive decision, but the inevitable conclusion of months of silent mourning. As the steam from the coffee dissipated in front of me, I felt a strange calm, almost liberating. There was no anger, no sadness, no euphoria, just peace. When Valeria woke up, she found me sitting in front of the window, watching the empty street. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked in a sleepy voice. I looked at her without looking away from the dawn and answered, "Thinking about my freedom." She didn't fully understand, but her expression changed. Perhaps for the first time she understood that I was serious. The week following my decision was like walking through unknown but strangely familiar territory. Every day that passed without depending emotionally on Valeria made me feel lighter, more in control of myself. I went to the lawyer's office, a middle-aged man with a calm voice and professional serenity that calmed me. I explained my situation without embellishment, with the naturalness of someone narrating a story that had already ended. I want a divorce without conflicts, without fights. Just close this cycle, I told him. He nodded, accustomed to hearing those phrases. While reviewing the documents, I felt a slight tremor in my hands. But it wasn't fear, it was a certainty of doing the right thing. I left his office with the representation contract in the folder, and my soul clear as if I had let go of a weight of years. When I returned home, Valeria was in the kitchen pouring herself a tea. She looked at me, noticed my calm, and frowned. "Where were you?" she asked. "With my lawyer," I answered, and the expression on her face was a mirror of what she herself had caused. In the following days, the house became a space of echoes and silences that no longer hurt. I worked from my study and left early. She tried to resume joint routines that she had long let die. She cooked for two, played music, opened the curtains as if the light could erase the distance. But none of that worked anymore. The bond that once united us was withered, and although she tried to water it with belated gestures, the roots were rotten. One night, while we were having dinner in silence, she dared to say, "We could try again, Tomas. Maybe go to therapy or take some time away." Her voice trembled between hope and fear. I looked at her serenely, and for the first time, I felt no resentment. "Valeria, there is no time away when there is no way back. All this ended months ago. Only now we are accepting it." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply lowered her head, understanding that my decision was not a passing reaction, but an inevitable consequence. As the legal process progressed, I began to prepare my departure. I looked for a new apartment in the city of Hills, 2 hours from Monteverde, a small place with a view of the park, close to my new job at a fintech company that had hired me recently. I felt that life was offering me a new beginning, a version of me that had waited too long to be born. I packed my things calmly, without hurry: books, clothes, photographs. The few, that still meant something to me. Valeria watched everything from the door without intervening, as if each sealed box was another blow of reality. "I never thought you would be serious," she said one night while watching me put away the last papers. "I never thought you would dare to tell me to find someone else." I replied with a half smile. That was the last meaningful conversation we had. The rest were formalities, papers, signatures, and a goodbye without drama, but with the force of something irreversible. The day I moved, it was raining, just like that night when she called me from the stranded car. I loaded the boxes into the trunk, closed the door of the old apartment, and took a deep breath. I didn't feel sadness or extreme relief, just a full silence, as if my whole life was telling me, "It's done. You finally chose yourself." Driving toward the hills was like going through a tunnel between the past and the future. Every kilometer was a memory left behind. The dinners full of silences, the laughs that faded away, the promises that dissolved like smoke. I arrived at the new apartment at sunset with the sky dyed orange. There were no furniture yet, just an air mattress, a lamp, and my freedom. That night I slept on the floor, but I slept in peace. Over the weeks, my life began to rebuild itself in a simple way. I got used to the silence, but this time it didn't hurt. It was a clean silence, chosen. I started running in the mornings, cooking for myself, reconnecting with friends I had stopped seeing. At work, I quickly earned respect. I realized that the weight I carried at home had drained my energy for years. Valeria wrote me a couple of short messages, without resentment, but with a background of nostalgia. "I hope you're well. I thought of you when I passed by that cafe." I never replied, not out of pride, but because I understood that answering would be opening a door that should remain closed. I had spent too much time begging for attention. Now I preferred the value of my own silence. Time when one starts overbehaves, strangely. The days seem longer, but the hours weigh less. In the hills, life acquired a serene, almost therapeutic rhythm. At first, I struggled to adapt to the absolute silence of the apartment. There was no sound of dishes, no half conversations, no sound of Valeria typing on her computer. But with the days, that silence transformed into something kind, into a different company. I realized that for years I had confused company with presence. Having someone beside you doesn't mean having love. Sometimes it just means sharing a routine. I began to enjoy simple things: making coffee at dawn, reading without interruptions, leaving the window open, and listening to the distant bustle of the park. Little by little, I remembered who I was before being the complacent husband who always said yes. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, I thought about her, not with resentment, but with a melancholic curiosity. I wondered if she still slept on the left side of the bed, if she had learned to pay the bills on time, if she still checked her phone waiting for some message from me. I didn't want to go back, not even to check how she was. But part of me wanted to understand how a relationship so alive had become a frozen routine. And with the months, I understood that love doesn't die suddenly. It rusts little by little with indifference. Valeria wasn't consciously cruel. She simply stopped looking, and I, for fear of losing her, stopped looking at myself. When one gives everything without measure, the other ends up believing they deserve it by right. I learned that loving doesn't mean sacrificing yourself completely, but balancing. I had been her support, but she never learned to support me. Almost a year passed before our paths crossed again. Unexpectedly, it was at an art fair in the city. She was there accompanying a friend who was exhibiting photographs. I was passing by with some work colleagues. I recognized her immediately. Her hair shorter, her expression more serene, although with a shadow in her gaze that wasn't there before. When our eyes met, she smiled timidly, and we greeted each other with a discreet gesture. We approached. We exchanged a couple of cordial phrases. "You look good," she said. "You too," I answered. There were no reproaches or apologies. Just two people who once loved each other, recognizing that they no longer owed each other anything. For the first time, I felt that I had truly forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed it. After that encounter, I confirmed that I had closed the circle. There were no relapses or nostalgias. I understood that self-love is not conquered when the other values you, but when you learn to do it yourself. In the hills, my life transformed into something that once seemed impossible, a story where I was a protagonist and not a secondary character. I began to travel on weekends, to take photography classes, to meet people without fear of repeating the past. Each new dawn reminded me that I didn't need anyone to feel complete. Sometimes, while walking through the city, I saw couples arguing in cafes and thought about how many Tomas and how many Valerias exist in the world. People trapped in relationships where affection is taken for granted, where respect evaporates without anyone noticing, until one day, from repeating the same thing so much, love goes out. Today, when I look back, I don't feel sadness, but gratitude. Valeria taught me, without meaning to, the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life, that one cannot say what the other does not want to take care of. I learned that love without respect is just mirage, and that indifference can hurt more than any infidelity. I also learned not to beg for affection, not to become anyone's emotional servant, not to hold up a bridge that the other does not cross. Now I understand that freedom does not come when one is left alone, but when one stops depending on the wrong love. And although I once dreamed of growing old by her side, now I know that I wouldn't change anything that happened, because deep down it was thanks to her that I finally learned to choose myself.